Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from, or if you are catching us on replay. This is The Awesome Journey, and I am your host, Kelly Steinicke, along with my co-host in care, Christy Howard. And we're just two girls that connected on LinkedIn 15 years ago, live on opposite sides of the country, have giving hearts, a passion for paying it forward, and I may have prayed to be living louder in my purpose. And now here we sit with microphones, bringing you The Awesome Journey. And as many of you know, and those of you who are new here, one of our primary goals was to highlight incredible individuals to share their unique stories and challenges, because we are all ultimately united in our personal journeys. And when Christy and I were putting all of this together, it really was about being motivated to bring some light motivation, inspiration, hope, and faith back to the forefront, because we just felt like there's so much negativity, bad news, fear, all the things. And when we originally sat down and we're putting our list together, because of course we're like, this is a great idea. Of course people are going to love it. We put the list together of who we thought would be guests. And I know on Christy's list, one of the first, if not the first, was our guest today, Mr. J. Dobyns, which we're super stoked to have here with us today. And so for those of you that don't know about Jay, I will give a little bit of a background, because we do want to spend as much time with him today as possible. Jay is a retired ATF agent. He was there for 27 years working undercover with ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives. He worked over 500 operations and is most well known for his Operation Black Biscuit, which was approximately 2 years long, infiltrating the 𝐉𝐚𝐲s right here in Arizona. So it definitely has a different twist for me personally, for so many reasons. He is also a New York best-selling author for his book, No Angel, and his prequel to that book called Catching Hell. We will include those links and any other topics, things that we discuss during this episode in the comments, as well as any post promotions, descriptions, etc. Because I highly recommend that people go out and get these books. I haven't read Catching Hell yet, but it is on my list. No Angel, epic. And for those of you who are saying, Kelly, you say that about all your guests who have books. Well, guess what? Our guests write rad books. That's all I can say. It is an incredible book, so well done. It will give you all the feels and rattle you to your friggin' core. I'm not going to lie. And I do want to remind everyone, too, that this is an unfiltered version. We are talking about things that involve drugs, violence, sex, and we may use some adult language. So anyone who will be offended, this episode is not for you. And I do want to finish up on a little bit on Jay. Is he is also a speaker. He was just actually local in Phoenix last week. And most recently, he is a high school football coach in Tucson, Arizona. And the Coach of the Year award was just recently renamed to the Dobyns in 2022, I believe. And before I turn it over to Christy, man, I just want to say it is such a privilege to have your time. It is an honor, blessing, all those things. And to say thank you for your service, it doesn't even begin to feel strong enough for what you've done. You are one of those human beings that goes out and puts themselves and has put themselves in situations between good and evil that most of us could never even begin to imagine. And for being a home state Arizona girl, I thank you for making my home state, this nation and beyond, a safer place for what you do. And in the midst of all those folks out there that have the audacity to be critics for those items. So thank you for being who you are and for making the world a better place, man. So that all being said, we want to spend as much time with Jay as possible. But before we do, I will turn it over to the woman that made this one possible, my co-host in care and soul sister, Christy Howard.
Hello. If the internet starts going shaky, I'm over in Florida. It's going to start pouring soon. I'm not in the part where the hurricane's supposed to hit, but we're going to get the dirty side of the water. Anyway, so Jay, I've known Jay for 12 years. He introduced me to the whole Fast and Furious operation. I was living in Arizona, and it wasn't something that was really, in the media. And because of him, I've always been friends with Agent Alphabets. I love the spies. I love undercover. I love the first responders. But when I met Jay, I had no idea who he was. I just knew that he had this swagger when he walked in, and it was just like, that guy looks like a badass, but there's something about him. I can see a huge heart in him. Over the years, he has taught me so much about life and about the ugliness of life and about how to stand up for myself with my own confidence, even though you got haters out there. So with that said, Jay, we do have some people coming in talking, but I will sort of introduce yourself because, as I said, I didn't know who the hell you were. And you are somebody. I mean, you have seen hell and back, hence the book. So share a little bit about, the football, the NFL, being shot on your first week. So go for it.
Yeah, Kelly and Christy, thank you for having me. Kelly, you read that introduction exactly as I wrote it for you. It was very flattering. Thank you.
And I will send you
my hello to your audience. Yeah, I was an ATF agent for 27 years, as Kelly mentioned. Before that, I was an athlete. I played football in college. That did not turn out the way I had hoped that it would. I became a federal agent. I retired in 2014. I've been retired almost 10 years. Oh man, during that experience, most of my time was spent undercover. And when I finished, I've been coaching high school football. So that's it in a nutshell.
Awesome. And I think
let's go into tell us about that first week. Sorry, Kelly, I'm interrupting.
Yeah,
tell me about that first week on the ATF and being the shot.
Yeah, you're on pause, Christy. There's a little bit of a delay. At least for me, I'm getting a little bit of a delay. I was just saying the same exact thing, so no worries. It's doing the transition of how we went from football and career change into ATF.
Yeah, well, I was a college football player, and all I ever had was a plan A. I was going to play professional football, and I had a nice college career. I went to the 1985 NFL Combine, and it took me about 10 minutes of working out with the top level athletes in the country to realize I wasn't going to play professional football. I wasn't as good as I thought I was, and I wasn't as good as these kids I was competing with. And so I was left like a lot of young people. All I ever had was a plan A. I didn't have a plan B. And so I almost fell into ATF. I had an interest in undercover work. So I got hired on a Monday in November of 1987. 4 days later, I was taken hostage and shot. I'll try to show you if I can. So this is the shirt that I was wearing 4 days on the job. That hole right there is where the bullet went in my back. And the holes up front are where the bullet came out of my chest.
Dang.
The bullet, it went in my back. It went through my lung. It narrowly missed my heart. It exited my chest. And so, after 4 days on the job, like I was laying in the dirt and grime of this trailer park with blood coming out of my chest, like you're holding your thumb over the end of a garden hose. We get paid every 2 weeks. I hadn't gotten a paycheck yet. And so it was a pretty dramatic and traumatic way to start. But I knew what I wanted to do. I in spite of all that, and the things that came afterwards, I loved it. I loved my job. And so I just wanted to get back to work and see if I could do it right. See if I could do it better.
I mean, and that was a like life-threatening injury, because you had like a collapsed lung. It was a very big deal. And I think, and one of the things that I heard you saying is there was a line of attorneys outside of your hospital room and saying, hey, we can get you this settlement. But you had the attitude of, nope, I'm going back to work because I'm going to do it better this next time. And so you did. And what went on from there?
Well, you know what I did? I had a lot of personal injury and liability attorneys saying, coming to me when I was in the hospital. They were saying, like, you weren't trained for this. You weren't prepared for this. Tell us how much money you want. How many zeros do you want on the check? We can get you generational type money without ever going to a courtroom. And all I could think of was like, go away, get out of here. There is no cop, no public servant that I ever met that took a badge and a gun and ever thought about money. You don't take those kind of jobs to get rich. You take them for other reasons. And so I just wanted to try again. I knew that I started off failing, but I felt like I could do better. I felt like I was better than that.
Wow. And then from there, because this was a big publicity story, obviously locally, then you transitioned over to Chicago. Is that right?
I'm listening to you guys, but my internet's off.
Yeah, she's definitely having issues with the internet. Hurricane is happening. She's in safe area, everyone, but just definitely having connectivity issues. So, Jay, just to continue the conversation, is following the shooting. Of course, it was locally. There was a lot of publicity, and then you moved on to Chicago. And then what went down there?
Well, yeah, based on my athletic career, and then the shooting,
Just keep on talking.
it got a ton of publicity, a ton of local publicity, and I knew I wanted to work undercover. And so I told my bosses, like, I haven't given up that dream. And their response was, well, you can't do it here. And I said, well, then find a spot for me where I can, because I'm not willing to give this dream up. So I ended up being transferred to Chicago. And then, 18 months later, I was in another shooting there. We did an undercover reverse of some machine guns to some gang members in the attempt to arrest them. I got run over by an escaping vehicle. I got shot by the gang members. I shot back and shot the driver of the getaway car. And so, in the first 18 months, man, it was a rough start. But I'll tell you this: like the first week, and then the first 18 months, and then 27 years of all those things. Like every morning when my alarm clock went off, I was excited to go to work. The good days, the bad days, through the failures and the successes, I always considered it like a privilege to be handed a badge and a gun and asked by my community to stand up against predators and violence on behalf of good and innocent people who just wanted to live a safe life. Like, we all want the same thing. And it doesn't matter if you live in a house that has dirt floors or if you're in a mansion. We want to be safe in our homes. We want to be safe in our neighborhoods. Amen. We want our kids to get a good education and have a chance at life. We want to have a job, employment that allows us to live a dignified life. It doesn't matter like where you are at politically, how you feel about our candidates or our world. It doesn't matter about where you're at socioeconomically. We all want those things. That should be our common bond.
Amen to that. And I think somewhere along the way of doing the reading, there was a statement that I read by you, because your faith is strong, and I love that, about how you got through things because the hand of God was on your shoulder, along with a pistol on your waist. And again, I go back to the whole thing of, man, I wish there were more of you, because it is a lost art and doesn't exist nearly the way it did back in the day, because we need more of you in the world.
I'll say this, like, based on my life's experiences, the very best thing that came of all of it was finding my spirituality. And there's a couple points to that. One, I learned very much the hard way. If the only time you're talking to God is when you're in trouble, you're in trouble.
Right.
You have to have a relationship. And then for me personally, I have done so many things wrong. I have made so many mistakes. I carry around a lot of shame and humiliation and regret. I've made a million mistakes in my life, but God and my wife and my kids and my friends have given me 1,000,001 second chances to try to get it right. And so that's the beauty of being a believer.
Yes. Oh, I love that. So important. And especially in your line of work, having that and the strength of family around you, which I know is so important throughout your career. And, specifically during Operation Black Biscuit here in Arizona, infiltrating the Hells Angels, which of course you're most well known for, um, is to talk a bit about that, and maybe even just starting with uh, the name of the operation, Black Biscuit, because I think so many people have such a misinterpretation of where that actually came from.
Well, Operation Black Biscuit was a task force that was assembled to attempt to infiltrate the Hells Angels in Arizona on the West Coast. The Hells Angels at that point in time, we're talking about the early 2000s, they were operating with impunity. I mean, they had become very violent, and no one was really checking them. So the case agent, the organizer, the brains behind it was an ATF agent named Joe Slatella. And Joseph was a Phoenix-based agent and was the best, smartest, most courageous, most fearless case agent that I'd ever crossed paths with. I've said many times, if my kids got kidnapped and I could only pick one person to go find them and figure it out, it would be Joe Slatella.
Wow.
So Joe was a huge hockey fan. So the case was named Operation Black Biscuit, which is a nickname for a hockey puck.
Right.
It was designed to deflect attention, to deflect anybody who might be scrolling or looking at it. It wouldn't make sense. It had no tie to the Hells Angels. People who don't know what Operation Black Biscuit means, people that want to start off with a negative mindset, immediately put some kind of racist put it in a racist context. That was never it. It actually proved the point. People think it means something other than what it means.
Right.
So the ones who got a racist viewpoint of it, they're just wrong. They don't know what they don't know.
Right. And it's super interesting because, of course, me being involved in law enforcement, not myself as a profession, but with other relationships in my life, and being in Arizona, of course, knowing about a lot of those incidents that occurred in the early 2000s, and of course, prepping for this show and having this conversation with you, Jay, made it a lot more interesting for me to dive into, and having a lot of holy shit moments, because I was like, I had no idea that was associated to this, or and actually how massive the Hells Angels were at the time, and certainly continue to be. They're a freaking organization, and one of the things, there's so many things that you said that I found fascinating, but their their basis is that they're outlaws. That they're against government, they're against following rules, and they're against regulation and all of these things. But yet they're an organization that has more rules and regulations and policy than so many. And that all being said, how did you originally begin the process of infiltration? Because it's not like you just walked into a bar and were like, "Hey, man, let me buy you a beer." What did that look like?
Well, I'll tell you what, the Hells Angels and the biker world it has its own culture, and it has its own set of rules. And so the umbrella of that culture is that they do not want to live by society's rules and society's laws. They want to live by their own. But they've got their own culture and set of rules that when I was approached to lead the undercover team, my first response was, like, I'm not the right guy. I can name off the top of my head 10 guys who would fit this role better than I will. I had 15 years of undercover experience at that time. I'd gone out and bought everything from rusted shut Saturday night specials to shoulder launch rockets. I bought everything from homemade PVC pipe bombs to servo activated remote control IEDs. I bought street level dope, dime bags and 8 balls out of the park, to cartel level dope. I'd done home invasion infiltrations and murder for hires playing a hitman, but I was not a biker investigator. So I was in over my head. I was overwhelmed. Joe Slatella convinced me, like, just try with me. So I was never, and have never ever publicly or privately claimed to be the best undercover agent out there. There's many that I admire who I believe are better at it than I was. What I had going for me is that I was always willing. I was always willing to try. I was always willing to raise my hand and work on cases that either people thought were too small, were too big, were too dangerous, were impossible. Because I was always more concerned with how I would feel about myself if I didn't try instead of I failed. So, so it was willingness to try, and I was learning on the fly the best I could. But I was being trained now by the Hell's Angels, which are the kingpins, the top of the mountain of in the biker world. Everybody, every kid whoever slung his leg over a bicycle at some point pretended or fantasized about being a Hell's Angel. They're an international crime syndicate. They're on every continent, thousands of members, hundreds of chapters. And these cats have their PhDs in violence and intimidation. They're very good at it.
Yeah, and what one of the things that you guys did that I found so interesting is because it wasn't that you did just walk into a bar and be like, "Hey, man, I I want to join." That you guys actually went to Mexico first and infiltrated a gang in Mexico to gain street cred, if you will, and you were actually invited to be a hangout. I think is the first tier. Is that correct?
Well, in order to have credibility in the eyes of the Hells Angels, like I didn't want to be just some guy sitting at the end of the bar with some tattoos and earrings and trying to look scary. Like that wasn't enough. There's thousands of those dudes out there. So we first infiltrated another outlaw motorcycle gang called the Solo Angels, which were based in Mexico. And we infiltrated them not to investigate them, but to use that patch and that association for credibility in the eyes of the Hells Angels. So that was, our first kind of baby step. And this all started with two main events. The Hells Angels in Mesa, Arizona, had murdered an innocent woman, a lady named Cynthia Garcia, who had a bunch of kids at home. She went to a party at the Mesa Hells Angels clubhouse. She said the wrong things to the wrong people in the wrong place. They stomped her to near death on the floor of the Mesa clubhouse. Then they wrapped her up in a piece of carpeting, stuffed her in the trunk of a car, and took her out to Apache Junction and cut her head off. That is in their world what they felt was an appropriate response to being insulted. Then you couple that with the riot in April of 2002 at the Harris Casino in Laughlin, Nevada, where the Hells Angels and the Mongols, literally hundreds of these bikers, had a riot over this long-standing dispute, this long-standing bloodbath. You had dead bikers, you had dozens of them injured, all captured by hundreds of closed-circuit television cameras. They did not care. They didn't care who saw them. They didn't care about any of the consequences. They were there to draw blood.
Yeah. And that was, I remember that because at the time I was a frequenter of Laughlin, but not being far from Phoenix, and I completely remember that happening. But I was still, I'm like, I had no idea that the Flamingo was like the home base for the Hells Angels in Laughlin and Harrah's was the Mongols.
I was with them. I was with the Hells Angels at the Flamingo that night.
Dang.
It was a crazy night. You couldn't put this in a movie. Quentin Tarantino couldn't create this situation as dramatic and traumatic and dynamic as it was in real life.
Yeah, that was nuts. Christy? Yeah, you're on mute, sister.
We're not lip readers. We're trying.
I know, right?
I just read that. I know what that was. I know what that was too.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it wasn't vacuum.
No, that was the universal language of the F-bomb.
Yes, it was. Well, to continue while Christy works on that, because of course that was a freaking insane event, and I remember watching all those videotapes. And you're right, it was like nobody was hiding. I did hear though somewhere too that they're along the way of doing all this research that I was so freaking fascinated by, is that the local law enforcement had come to the Flamingo and had brought up that, hey, your boys are outnumbered at Harrah's. and almost as if like sparked, the fire, because then everybody took off, or a whole bunch more went and took off down to Hera's, and then of course the fight ensued uh from the get-go, from the jump. And were you there? I know you were at the Flamingo, but did you go down to Hera's when that happened?
Is real. There were some Hell's Angels that were being surrounded at the Harris. Word got to the Hell's Angels, and with the snap of a finger, all those Hell's Angels were gone out of the Flamingo. Where did they go? Where'd the boys go? What happened? Well, they got word, and as fast as they could get there, they were on the road rolling towards the Harris to get in the fight, to take care of their boys.
Dang. I mean, that's intense. And I there was another situation that I want to talk about too, where, because of course, in order to get into, infiltrate, or even become part of any chapter of the Hells Angels, you've got to prove yourself in ways that most of us can never even begin to fathom. And one of the ways that you were to prove was, and I believe it was the Mongols were going to Vegas, and or the Banditos. I do kind of get the two intertwined, and I apologize. But you were told, and I think maybe it may have been you were told you needed to go and to shoot, because that was your territory, and shoot to kill before the kickstands ever hit the ground in your territory as a Hell's Angel.
Yeah, I was, given a murder assignment, sent on an assassination run. The Hells Angels in Arizona were going to Las Vegas to support the Hells Angels in Las Vegas. The Banditos were going to be coming through town. They knew where they were going to land. They didn't have a hall pass from the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels felt like that was their territory. And I was given instructions by the Hells Angels. When these dudes show up, you better shoot them before they get their kickstands down, because we're going to be watching you. And if you don't, we're going to shoot you. That world is, it's an uncompromising, no nonsense world of violence. And it's not for everybody. You really have to have a strong stomach for it, because it's just part of their existence. Blood and violence and prison and death and murder are part of their everyday life.
Right, normal. And so what did you do in that situation?
Well, I showed up to this location.
I got a quick question. Can you hear me yet?
Yes.
Yes. You can't hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, you can hear me, or no, you can't?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm interrupting. I'm going to totally interrupt here, because Kelly will sit here and get into this for hours. And unfortunately, Jay, and as you know me, I love the story, but we have so much more to go forward, and we have questions, we have comments. However, I just lost comments, so I have to look on the LinkedIn. I want everybody to know this is the first book. Mine's obviously,
awesome.
Very tattered. Okay. Now we go into, because Jay's talking about the Hells Angels, and I don't want to give away the whole story. Go get the book. I mean, it's an awesome book. And it goes into such details. But what happened is, after the Hells Angels, and I can call them the suits that are assholes, those with the ATF, but I'm allowed to say that because I don't work for them, but I know some of them. Anyway, so how they treated him after he did the infiltration of the Hells Angels, and then these guys got off. I mean, and you'll find this out. But so years later, years later, Jay writes a wrong book. My bad.
We're talking about Bob before the show, so.
There you go.
Go ahead and put Bob's book up there, man.
Right?
He's my buddy. You can promote Bob.
Okay.
That's right.
This is
Bob.
So
Great
Bob,
book.
and he was our number 2 guest on the Awesome Journey.
The last
and then this one,
Great
years
book.
later. Yes, that was. And then years later, Jay wrote this book that tells you the aftermath of what he had to deal with the suits that are assholes, with the lawsuits, but also with his family and the dramatic emotional turmoil from doing that. Literally all the other undercovers, yes, as Bob explained, and the other guys that we've had in there, the mental stuff that you have to keep inside yourself that you can't share with other people, to go through and go forward and become who he has today, of where he is today. So can you fill into that? And I know, Kelly, you want to go into every freaking detail,
no. Here's what I would. Well, one, you were offline, so I was still trying to carry it forward. But I wanted to kind of get of the background of the kind of stuff that was going on in the infiltration, because you were living with these people. It's not like you went to work 9 to 5 and went home. You were living in this world with these people on the day-to-day for nearly 2 years. And to Christy's point, that whole transition and that period of, what did that do? Not just to, and I believe this was a statement that you made somewhere too. Did you infiltrate the Hells Angels, or did they infiltrate you? Because of how it did impact you personally, emotionally, and all of those things, as well as your relationship with your loved ones, including your family.
Well, I think I can probably answer all that with one story. So over the course of this 2-year infiltration, I didn't spend a lot of time at home. When I came home, I spent the least amount of time I had to at home. I'd pay the bills, pat the kids on the head, have a cup of coffee with my wife. I couldn't wait to get back and be out there smoking and joking with the gangsters.
Wow.
Which is one of those regrets that I carry with me today. At the end of the case, to kind of push things over the top, we fabricated a murder, and we built a murder scene where we had killed the Hells Angels rival, and then took that evidence back to the Hells Angels to convince them that we had taken care of business on behalf of the gang. So over the course of this case, and even before that, my son, who was a little boy through all this, he would always run out in the yard when I was getting ready to leave and say, "Dad, don't leave yet. I got something for you." And he'd come and he'd put a rock in my hand. So for years, I collected these good luck charms from my little boy. And I kept them. I always had one in my pocket. I had them in the saddlebags of my motorcycle, in my undercover car, my undercover house. I was handing them out to my partners during the case. I was saying, all this violence, all this death that's spinning around us, like, hang on to Jack's rock, because these good luck charms, I don't know what it is, but they're working. So right before we go to do this operation where we're going to fake the murder and top the case off, I'm getting ready to leave, and Jackie goes through his same routine. "Dad, don't leave yet. I got something for you." And he comes running out and he hands me this rock, which I've held on to for 20 plus years. And he's like, "Dad, this one's special. I've been saving it for you. It's shaped like a heart." And so, I'm a 40-year-old father, and I have this 8-year-old boy, and I'm trying to comfort him. And I said, "Dude," I said, "all those things that I haven't been doing, I'm going to do with you. I'm almost done. We're going to ride bikes and play catch and wrestle and go to the movies and read books. And it's all because of your good luck charms. It's all because of these rocks. I'm almost done." And this little boy's standing on my driveway, and no shirt, no shoes, and tears start running down his cheeks. And he's like, "Dad, those weren't for good luck, and you shouldn't have given them away. They were only for you." He's like, "Those were for you to put in your pocket. And every time you thought someone was going to hurt you, you could put your hand in there and touch that rock, and it would be like me being there to help you fight them." Mm-hmm. That was the best day and the worst day of my life. The worst day is that, the best day was that I came to realize that my job wasn't to be Donnie Brasco Part 2, wasn't to be super cop or be an undercover guy. My job was to try to raise good kids, and I was failing miserably. The best part was that I realized I was failing miserably and had to change.
Oh, that story, I sobbed when I first uh, read that because out of the mouths of babes, right? I mean, what a a wise thing for a young boy to say and how he sees his father.
You know what? I had to have an 8-year-old kid teach me what my job was. And when I talk about like carrying like shame and regret and humiliation around, man, that's a big part of it. Like the battle damage I put on my family leading this life, the people that loved and supported me the most, I treated the worst.
Yeah.
I took them for granted because I knew they'd always be there. Um, and I took that for granted, and like I'm ashamed of that. That's not something you want to say on a podcast with an audience out there that doesn't know you. But also, if I don't speak transparently, if I don't talk to you honestly,
So,
then what credibility do I have? If all I do is tell hero stories and
Right.
I love me stories,
That's right.
then you're only getting half the story.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christy. We can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
Technology's only good when it works.
For reals, and because this is such an important transition for so many reasons, talking about the aftermath or the issues during, because this was one of the things we talked to Bob Hamer about, his undercover work, but he was able to go home at the end of the day. And one of my questions was like, dude, how do you walk through the threshold and shut it off?
One of the times I came home, like I said, I wasn't spending much time at home. I didn't want to spend much time at home.
Right.
I wanted to be out on the street. And I came in one day, and my wife says, "You cannot be gone for an extended period of time and then walk in this house and speak to us and treat us like we're your gangster friends."
Oh.
And then in my self-defense, I was like, "Man, I'm not a light switch. I can't turn this on and off. I have to be on all the time." And then her response to that was, "Well, then you install a dimmer switch and dial that attitude down. And if you can't do that, don't come back here. You're not welcome at this house."
Wow. God bless her, because strength to say that. I was never involved with anyone doing that kind of level of work, but knowing a first responder and not being able to shut it off when they get home, the impact that that has on the relationships. But it speaks to the strength of the core of the love and everything else that was involved in your family, in getting through these times. But even at the end of this operation, as an example, how did you transition? Because clearly you are an adrenaline junkie, in a way that most of us would never be able to relate to be able to not have that in your life anymore and feeding you and you having as a focus.
Well, I'll tell you what, I was forced to readjust, and it was. I think I'll go where Christy was intending to take this. Is that when the case ended, and the Hell's Angels found out that Jaybird Davis, the gun runner, debt collector, hitman, was actually Jay Dobyns, the ATF agent.
Yeah.
But the tiger doesn't change its stripes. Man, the death threats started coming in. The Hells Angels issued murder contracts on me. They were picked up by the MS-13, by the Aryan Brotherhood. There's a
Damn.
street gang in LA that was sniffing around it.
Yeah.
All their supporters and were in on the game. And it was a very eye-opening time because this agency and these people that I committed my life to
Yeah.
and had neglected and basically abandoned and betrayed my own family for
Right.
this mission that I believed in. Like when I needed help, it wasn't there. ATF told me, "Man, you're on your own. Like you have to figure this out."
And didn't they, there's and I don't know the technical term, I apologize, but they do have a level of protecting you and your identity, but that was released. Like people were able to find your freaking contact information.
Well, they had unmasked all my backstopping, all my cover documents, and made all my personal information open source, easy, accessible information. 3 months after they did that, my house was burned to the ground. Like arson, it was attacked by arsonists singular or plural, and we lost everything. And then you would think that that was, at least in my mind, like I had some hope. In the midst of the rubble and destruction of my house, I had some hope because I said, now they can't ignore this anymore. They have to react to this.
Right.
And they doubled down again. ATF built a task force
So
with a mission to frame me as the arsonist of my own house.
God, what a complete mind
You
fuck.
know, like the thing is, like I always worked as hard as I could for ATF. I loved ATF. I still love ATF, to be quite honest with you. The problems I ran into were not ATF, the big umbrella of ATF. There's great men and women with their boots on the ground who like work and take risks for us every day. I ran into this perfect storm of managers who were incompetent and retaliatory and corrupt. And it just so happens that the same people that were managing me when they were beating me up were the same ones that were running Operation Fast and Furious and pushing thousands of guns and machine guns to the cartels in Mexico. And they were just counting dead bodies in Mexico to justify their operation.
Damn,
And
that's
so it was this window of
Yeah.
corruption and criminal activity that has not probably, hopefully, been seen before or since.
that's nuts. Go ahead, Christy.
Yet they got promoted. They all got
Right.
promoted. That's the whole.
Well, I think that
I
we see
mean,
it like
it's terrible.
we see it today. We see it. I mean, this is years back, but we see it today. Like
For
the
sure.
powerful people, the shot callers within the government, we know that they're doing things wrong. We see the proof of the things they're doing wrong. They always land on their feet.
Yeah.
They always get a soft
Of
landing.
course.
They always have a safety net. Man, those people don't get hurt. So when people are saying, oh, X, whoever you want to fill in the blank, should be in prison, that's never going to happen. Those people don't go to prison.
Right.
That's so nuts.
Right. So let's talk about how after Fast and Furious, you had you also had against the ATF, and then also you just decided to go check out and go coach, do something that you're very passionate about and giving back, and how you found how you got your journey back, and your spiritual journey, and realizing what was important to you. I mean, I know that I know lots of undercover people, and the ego does, as you said, you had to stay in character. So when you would go home, you were a biker guy and your wife was like, no, not going to work. However, those of us that have been around people like you, we're strong women, but you can only take so much. And for you to say, hey, okay, this isn't who I am. This is the character I was supposed to play. Now I have to figure out who I am, where I'm supposed to be. So where was that transformation from, as my ticker says, from the battle rooms to the soulful hearing?
Yeah.
Pride and ego are super dangerous.
Yeah.
And I had a huge ego. I had a lot of pride, and I had it kicked out of me, to be honest with you. And all the things that I believed in, all the things that I thought I stood for, came in question. And I didn't know what my purpose was anymore. This purpose that I believed in for years, for my entire adult life, dissolved. It wasn't real. It was all counterfeit. At least based on my experiences. And so, yeah, I tapped out. I don't have social media. No one should care about how I feel about anything, let alone want to see what my breakfast looked like. My opinion and my viewpoint on the world is no more important than any of the people that are here in this sidebar or listening to this or anywhere that's out there. And so,
however, we learn, but Jay, however, each person's story, we might not think it's important, but we learn from their story.
Yeah. Amen.
We learn that our ego and our pride can take so much out of us.
Well,
I mean, so
how do you learn humility?
I'm
You
blessed
learn
that you're
humility
here.
by getting your ass kicked.
Yeah. And I think,
True.
I think
True.
one of the things that you've experienced, Jay, that most of us don't, that I would think has to be a completely interesting perspective is, we all have light and dark within us, whether or not people want to agree with that or not. And you were surrounded by darkness and all of these things that went on, and you lived like these people. I'm not saying that, but they're also human beings. Like, you had caring relationships for some of these people who were good people, other than the fact of some of the crap they did in the Hells Angels. But to have that good, evil thing and being able to put it in check, I just think that that would also be, I don't know, just an interesting process to be able to redefine yourself again back into the normal world, whatever that
Well,
is.
I'll tell you a super important event for me personally is that I was this very dark, bitter. I had become like a really nasty person. And I get approached by some friends that said, "We want you to go to Africa with us because we rescue orphans in Africa. These kids that have been orphaned by either violence or war or disease, these orphans get abused. The girls get turned into sex slaves. The boys get forced into forced labor." And my initial reaction was like, I can't even take care of my kids. How am I going to take care of orphans in Africa?
Mm-hmm.
They stayed on me. I ended up going to Africa. And we went into these villages that, like, some of these babies, some of these little ones had never seen a white face before. And they had nothing. They had all the tragedies of life.
Yeah.
The saying, not having a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, they had to invent it there when I got there. And I was stunned. I was so angry. I was so bitter when I went over there. These kids who had nothing, they couldn't even hope to have hope in their life. They were happy and they were loving. Those kids would have traded places and traded problems with me like that had they had the chance. I was so pathetic. I was so feeling sorry for myself and felt like life in the world hadn't treated me right. And then I went over there and saw really how, like, people struggle. I met this kid in this process. Of all names, this little boy's name is God's News.
Oh
And
my
he was just stuck on me. Everywhere I went, this kid followed me. He was like on my hip and hugging on me. So we're in this circle and we're asking these kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And one of them's like, man, I want to be a doctor. Like, we're all sick. Everybody here's sick. Someone has to be a doctor for us. Go to the next one. I want to be a farmer. We don't have anything to eat. Everybody's hungry. And they came to God's News and he said, I want to be a policeman. I want to be like Jay. People come in here and hurt us and they steal from us, and someone has to do something about it. That was that was so, it's actually a shameful story that I have to experience these things to learn. I'm embarrassed by that. I will say this, wisdom is something that always came to me right after I needed it.
Yeah. But that's it for everyone, right? And I think truly that is a beautiful friggin' story, because that is where faith comes back in. God was smacking you across the face and put it right in front. And what a blessing that you had friends in your life that knew, man, this is what you need to get.
I thought that God had lost my phone number, and he had lost my phone number. He called me to go to Africa.
Yeah. Oh.
He had a lesson to teach me. It was just never according to my plan.
He does do that often.
The way that I want to do things, the plan that I have, is never the right plan. His plan is the right plan. Whoever thought like that, I'm going to solve this and get some understanding and some clarity by going to Africa. That would have never been my plan.
Oh, that's beautiful. And again, I say no shame, no any of that. Jay, that is such a beautiful story that will, I guarantee you, first of all, it's impacted me greatly. I'm certain it has Christy and will many others in the audience, because it is those things, to go back to the very beginning of, our life's biggest dips, tragedies, however you want to say it, generally lead us all to a place where we need to re-find our faith, rediscover it, be knocked over by it, whatever it is. And the beauty in that message, because so many people are struggling. Mental health is exemplified with all the crap that's going on in the world, the job market, the continued layoffs. And I know so many people that are struggling. And I know that that will be a key that will be taken away. And Christy, since we can hear you, I do want to toss it back over to you again, sister.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You still can't.
Can.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay.
We can.
Can. Okay, good. So because of the struggles, when you do your coaching, I mean, you've gone back to coaching, you're building your relationships that are important to you. You're realizing, and Kelly and I have dealt with this, that you find out who your true friends are when we're in the darkest. And then when we disappear, we find out who our friends are. So when you realize that this is my core, this is what's important to me, and now you're going and, you're going back and what you have done, and then you retired, and then you're going back of coaching. What do you bring to the kids, the young boys? I mean, a lot of them, and I don't know. I mean, I know the dirty tea, but they don't have broken homes. How do you approach them for them to grow from your own experiences? Tell them their experiences.
Well, I think
does that make sense? Or is it just
you hit it on the head? It's all about relationships.
Yeah.
The best part of my athletic career wasn't games or catches. It was my teammates. The best part of my ATF career, undercover work, was my partners. When I ran into the conflict at ATF, I thought that I had hundreds and hundreds of friends. It turns out I had hundreds of acquaintances. I had a handful of friends. My dad told me when I was a kid, it's better to have 4 quarters than 100 pennies. And that never made sense to me. And it is. It's better to have 4 quarters than 100 pennies, man. Like, have something that means something. You don't need a lot of them. So coaching these kids, I will say this. I know I'm not a great coach. I'm not even convinced I'm a good coach. But what I do is try to take these life's experiences, translate them to these kids through football, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel and make the same mistakes I made.
And I would think personally that has to be such a fulfilling experience to fulfill that father figure, whatever it is that you have shame for missing out. That has to fill a totally different personal component, I would imagine, just relationship wise with these young men.
Well, these simple messages that are delivered to a high school football team, they apply to all of us.
Yes.
I tell my kids, if you want something you never had, you're going to have to do things you've never done. Yeah. I tell them, if you want people to remember your name, you have to do something they can never forget. That doesn't apply just to high school football players. That applies to all of us.
Amen. Amen. Christy? Looks like she's frozen again. I just keep trying because I know she's going to have things and be like, dang it, I wanted to ask all these different things. Such an important conversation for so many reasons. And because, Christy and I, one of the focuses on all of this has been about mental health and particularly men's mental health, because for whatever reason, there's such a stigma in talking about it, and hearing stories like yours, Jay, impacts so many people who are struggling, because unfortunately with social media, and I think you being off of social media, I completely understand that. And I dip out on social media on an occasion because it's like, man, I need a reset, because it's a fake place. And people do what we would consider self-comparison. How come I'm not doing as well as this person? And it's like, people, it's not real, it's fake. And particularly when you're in a bad headspace, you've got to step away from it and get to a place, where you are reconnecting, with your faith, reading the Bible, reaching out to a friend, finding out who your friends are. And I've never heard the saying of it's better to have 4 quarters than 100 pennies, but I'm totally going to remember that because it is so absolutely true.
Right.
I mean, it's great. And you do find who your true friends are in your darkest days. And sometimes it can feel sad because it's like you said, I thought I had these hundreds of people that gave a shit about me, but it's like, well, it's not that they didn't, but they don't. They've moved on and they've gone elsewhere. It's an eye opener, but it's also something that you would never change because come shakedown, you know who you can call and who you can rely on. And what a gift for you to be able to share this story, not only for what you did in Operation Biscuit, because that or Black Biscuit, because that certainly does not uh, identify you as a human being and in any way. Like that's just a portion of your life. You are so many different parts of your story, and that including your high school football coaching. And now that Christy has popped back in, let's see if we can hear her again.
I'm sorry. This is
All right.
fucking
You got
tiring.
it. We can hear you.
Of all
Hear
people,
you.
of all people.
I know, but it
my
just means
internet
you have to
doesn't
have him
work.
back, Christy. That's all.
That's okay. We'll have to do a Teams or whatever, just play catch up. But no, I mean, my whole thing is the reason why Jay was the first person when Kelly came to me last November to say, "Hey, you want to do this podcast?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, but I don't like podcasts, so let's do a LinkedIn Live." Jay was the first person, and Jay, I called you. Remember, I called you. It's like, okay, and you're like, okay, whatever. I'm like, I don't know what we're gonna do, but I want you on. So that was back in November. And the more we've done this, the more we've pivoted, we keep on changing it because I'm fortunate through you that I do know a lot of great people that have some great stories, but they've gone through hell and back. They have seen things that where, Kelly and I have both suffered depression. I mean, we're both very vocal about our depression and what we've gone through, and understanding that our faith, God got you to Africa. God, there's certain things. I mean, Kelly and I were talking yesterday about some depression and everything, and I asked her a question. I said, "Do you know?" And she said, "No." I said, "Because you'll never know that question. You'll never know that answer of why God did this, but He wants us to grow from it." And so, from your years and what I learned out of the 12 years I've been friends with you and watching you and knowing you, and the ebbs and flows of taking what you've done, the ugliness, and seeing the ugliness towards you when you finally have turned around and saying, "Hey, this is what's important to me. I'm going to take what I've learned, what I've gone through, and pay it forward to these young kids, to my family, to my nieces and nephews." And again, I haven't really talked to you in a few years. However, I know you, Jay, and I know your heart because I saw that 12 years ago. Am I deaf? Can you guys hear me?
You're cutting. We can, but you're cutting. You're just started to cut out a
You know, some of the hard things that
I'm off my soapbox about you because you know how much I adore you, and I'm very blessed that you decided to come over here and share your story, and maybe we'll bring you back when my internet's not all screwed up because of a hurricane.
Well, like some of the hard things I've experienced, like I do not live bitter. I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. I think the people that intend harm for you or have bad wishes for you, the best way to overcome that is just lead a good, happy life.
Amen.
That gets them better than anything you can say.
Amen. One of my pivotal moments in my life of getting out of a horrible experience was having a moment with God. And my phrase was, "Please, Lord, help me become better and not bitter," because I did not want to live in that ugly place. But you're right. The best, and I kind of don't want to say the word revenge, but the best thing you can do in life is just live a happy, wonderful life. Because the more power you give to anything, whether it's a situation, a human being, whatever it is, you're giving your power away, and living in your power and finding that is a very powerful thing. And I definitely do want to say I would 100% love to have you back, because I know this has been so frustrating for Christy, and it's such a bummer. Because I would really like to even continue to dive deeper into more of the emotional, mental health portion of how the impacts and with your family and such, because I think those are such important stories right now for so many people to hear, because I do believe that mental health is exacerbated with all the craziness in this freaking world. And it's so important. And I know we're coming up here on an hour. It is 11:11, so make a wish. But Jay, as we wrap up, and I feel so horrible for our sweet Christy, because she is the reason that we're even sitting here today, is kind of what are your final thoughts, final messages for the audience today?
Well, you know, I think when I look at myself, and I think this applies to many of us, not all of us. I know you've had some very heroic guests on your show. When I look at myself, I am a common man who was placed in some uncommon situations and just did the best I could. So like some of the heroes out there and the people you've had, like they're people I admire. But I'm not heroic. I'm a survivor more than anything. I just survived it. I'm just a common man who survived it.
And have an amazing amount of humility, because I would say, and I think how I said in some of my social posts, you are an example from God that angels do exist among us, because without you, my home state and would not be a safer place. So you are a hero to me. Love, again, your humility, and the others you're referring to are also heroes. And before I do sign off, Christy, we want to try you one more time.
I'm back on for a second. Plus, I'm the one that has to end the live. So, Jay, you know, I'm blessed that you were here. You know that your story goes deep, and I want you to come back when my internet is normal.
Right. Thank you. Love you guys, and to all your audience out there.
I wish we could have. Wish we could have brought over the comments, but my internet kept on erasing them every time I'd flip back off. So I have people, but it's not climate change. It's a hurricane.
It is.
So
yes. Thank you, sister. And if anybody does have additional questions, we will go back to all the comments and we will respond. We'll include all the links to Jay's books, because we highly recommend them. We will look at having Jay back. And we're super bummed about Christy's internet today, but you know what? Shit happens and you got to roll with it. And that's what we did. So Jay, honor, privilege, pleasure, blessing, all of the things for you being here. We so appreciate your time, your sharing, your transparency, your authenticity. You're just an example, my friend. And we're so grateful that you shared with our audience today. And for all of our audience, we thank you for being here today. And please join us next week at 1:11 p.m. Eastern Time. And our guest next week will be the Here Brotherhood. So we will continue the conversation about men's mental health. You do not want to miss it. It is an incredible organization that so organically started, and they have literally just blown up. And it's a great organization. So do join us then. And until then, everyone remember, we're all on this journey together, and together we do make it awesome. Thanks so much. Have a great day.